Charles Manson and the Family was his band that was signed to like a major label owned by Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys. Charles Manson and the Family was his band. Listen, Charles Manson was a hardened criminal, and and he should be in prison. He committed tons and tons of heinous acts. But what he's been accused of is total nonsense. All right, Dave Weiss in the chat. What up, Weiss? All right. Oh, and by the way, these experiences with the Rogue Bears will show you that the Jew isn't our enemy. Like, look at the backstabbing I got from people claiming that they're just they're just simple followers of Christ. They're now just starting rumors that I'm a fraudulent, scam artist because they're jealous. And meanwhile, Dave Weiss is in the chat, like, crushing. It really is person to person. But we're going to get to some small hats, though. Some real devious guys. You mean Brian Wilson? Hang on, what's his name? Dennis. 1 second. 1 second. I got Dennis Wilson, the drummer. But maybe I was wrong about that. I'll look into it. George Bush Jr. played a role in the Manson for a bit. That's like next level Miles Mathis stuff. I got to look into that more, but I'm going to tell you the stuff that I find very gravy-inducing. All right, Sticks and Hammer has an interesting analysis of Manson. Yeah, but... All right, anyway, just let me stay a little focused here. Because a lot of people don't even know the basics of Manson. Where is his overview? Charlie Mance. All right, his followers committed a series of 9 murders at 4 locations in July and August of 1969. Coincidentally, right when they claimed they were going to the moon and Woodstock. According to the Los Angeles County District Attorney, Manson plotted to start a race war, which he and others disputed this motive because it wasn't true. In 1971, he was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder for the deaths of 7 people. The prosecution concealed that Manson never literally ordered the murders, but they contended that his ideology constituted an overt act of conspiracy. Manson was also convicted of first-degree murder for the deaths of Gary Hinman and Donald Shea. Manson was an unemployed ex-convict who spent more than half his life in correctional... All right, so now that you also know what the swastika represents, and you look at pictures like this, like Charlie Manson with the swastika on his forehead, it's all stagecraft, as Crow likes to say. The swastika is just the Big Dipper for the 4 seasons, We've been trained to think the swastika is another fall guy. Because this is going to be a little gravy-inducing, and I know it's illegal in some countries, but as a World War II history major in college, one thing I never quite understood was there is zero evidence that Adolfo Hitlerio, Mean Mr. Mustache himself, ordered the Holocaust. None. This is mainstream fact. There is no documents, there is no memos, there is no first-hand accounts, none that came out in the Nuremberg trials, none. There was no order from Adolfo Hitlerio to carry out the Holocaust. That's a fact. Fact. And just like that, there's no evidence whatsoever that Charles Manson ordered these killings. And this is when things get very interesting. Where is the other thing I was at? This is when things get very interesting. So, Charles Manson was, the whole narrative is that there was this big cross, and he would go on the cross, and he would convince his followers that he was Jesus by giving them acid, and that he would carry around this cross in this ranch and all that. All nonsense. But it was taken from another guy named Krishna Venta. This guy. This guy was the cult leader. Like, this guy was a legitimate cult leader in the 1950s in Chatsworth or one of those canyons. And he believed that there was going to be a race war in America. And he was going to start the race war in America. And then he would go into the desert with his 144,000 followers and survive, right? Okay. They lifted Krishna Aventa's entire story and just put it on Manson. Manson was a drug runner. Manson was a pimp. Manson was not a cult leader. Okay, so Krishna Venta, by the way, yes, he was a sneak. He was a small hat. Krishna Venta, born Francis Penkovic, was the leader of a California religious group in the 1940s and 50s. He was born in San Francisco. His father was a Jewish immigrant from Romania. Not a surprise. His mother was born in Utah. Penkovic graduated from high school in Nevada, married twice, and served in the United States Army during World War II. After the war, Penkovic decided to start his own religion. I may say, well, say it, I am Christ, I am the new Messiah. He also claimed to have led a convoy of rocket ships to Earth from the extinct planet Neophrates. In 1951, he legally changed his name to Krishna Venta in California. The Fountain of the World became famous in the press in the 40s and 50s for uniformly dressing in robes, going barefoot, and requiring its male members to grow beards and wear their hair long. The fountain was marginally conversational because one of the requirements for membership was that one donate all worldly assets to the group prior to joining. For most who joined the fountain, however, this was irrelevant since few had many possessions anyway. Okay, what I'm describing is a legit cult. Like when people say you have to donate all your possessions to a leader who claims to have a rocket ship and a beard and everything, you just might be entering a cult. The group's activities include fighting wildfires, offering shelter to those in need, and feeding the homeless. That sounds nice. They first gained national exposure in 1949 when the news wires carried the story that fountain members had been the first to offer aid to the victims of Standard Airlines Flight 897, which crashed in the Simi Hills, killing 35 of the 48 people aboard. See, I don't know. This all just sounds like a Hollywood script. Venta was killed in Chatsworth in 58 in a suicide bombing instigated by two disgruntled former followers. Let me guess. Their names were Captain Cutler and Ty. Peter Doma Kamenoff and Ralph Mueller. Mueller and Kamenoff. Gee, I wonder where their families came from. Anyway, who had charged that Venta mishandled cult funds and had been intimate with their wives. The two things to always watch for with cults. Do they want to have sex with your wives, and are they taking your money? If either one is true, you're in a cult. That's how you know when someone isn't a cult leader. This guy, not a cult leader. You know I'm not a cult leader because I never want any of your wives and I don't force you to give me your money. All right. Like the amount I have to explain that I'm not a... By the way, it's a fact, my mother's former employer accused her that I was a cult leader. So I do have to explain this sometimes. Mountain Bears in the house? Sweet. Sweet. All right, so anyway, what do we have here? Krishna. Spooky music. I know, cue spooky music. So after his death, two of his followers, Sister Dorothy Leon and Sister Wally, moved to Mount Shasta, California, where they channeled messages supposedly from him. Okay, so his entire story was taken and put onto Charlie Manson. So Charles Manson's people, allegedly, not by the orders of Manson, killed this woman. That's Sharon Tate, who was pregnant with that little sneak's baby. Right there you have, that's Polanski, Roman Polanski. And as you can see, he has an asymmetrical face. He's shorter than his woman. He has a little smirk like he's obsessed with the anus. And his hair looks shockingly sneaky. He has a crooked bow tie and he's next to a beautiful blonde, right? All red flags. Ladies, do not marry the sneaks. That guy's not, haven't heard the super sneaky music for a while. Oh, I know, I should have. I sent you a super chat yesterday willingly. Exactly. It's by choice. And I require zero sacrifices. You know? I'm not a cult leader. Look at the face. Come on. Oh, I know. And so this man, and I say man loosely, is the one who raped a 13-year-old on drugs at Jack Nicholson's house. And it was witnessed by Angelica Houston. And a lot of this stuff, and so Sharon Tate, who was, and he also directed Rosemary's Baby. He's a real like occultist, small-hatted weirdo, right? Polanski. And so she was 8 months pregnant when she was murdered. I believe it's all true, and I'll tell you why. Because I know Hollywood sneaks and all these people, sometimes they do stagecraft. Like, for example, certain shootings that happen at certain elementary schools may or may not have actually happened. You know, like buildings that fell in free fall speeds for the first time in the history of steel frame buildings may or may not have happened the way that it's been told. I understand that there is hoaxes and red flags and stuff. But the reason I think that this violence all took place, and I know why this can actually happen, is because they were running drugs for the mafia. So, but it wasn't real. Oh, I know. So you have to understand that back then in the 60s in Hollywood, even now as well, but now drugs have become so mainstream. You know, you can get your heroin and your crack from Rite Aid. So she has a 1,000-yard stare. Yeah. Sacrifice to facilitate the moon landings. I think that what it was is it's almost like it served a lot of people's interests. So there might have been people involved that did a sacrifice to serve the moon landing spell to keep people distracted, yada, yada. But I'm looking at it from a totally pragmatic, how life actually works way that I can prove. And Charles Manson was a drug runner and a pimp. You know, like sometimes people will analyze some of his quote unquote followers and when he would have sex with them, and they were all from abused backgrounds and stuff, he would tell them to like call him daddy and stuff like that. And so when you give that information to like a jury or just journalists or something, it's so out there and it's so weird that you immediately would think probably like, oh, cult. No, pimp. That's how pimps act. That's how a pimp, dominates women and then sells them for sex. And he was selling women for sex to all kinds of biker gangs and also famous people. It is alleged because a lot of these people were all living in this like weird commune type Hollywood pansexual druggy world that rubbed shoulders too much with the mafia and motorcycle gangs. So what would happen is Charles Manson was almost like this bridge. He was living at Dennis Wilson's house, or Brian, his last name was Wilson. He was the drummer for the Beach Boys. Charles Manson was living in his house, and he was making a record for them called Charles Manson and the Family. That was the name of their band. And so Manson and his prostitutes, not cult, would have these dune buggies all decked out in Texas and would drug run for biker gangs and the mafia to bring MDMA, cocaine, all this stuff. That got to Hollywood actors. That's where the mafia and criminality meets mainstream elite power. Warren Beatty. It's been like pretty much confirmed, that Jane Wyman was part of some of these bisexual orgies. All kinds of these names would be in these houses. Jack Nicholson, obviously, Polanski, obviously, all these sneaks. And they would need drugs to keep the women fueled. And that's when Manson came in. He was like the daywalker. He was enough of a criminal to get the drugs from the gangs and the mafia. He also claimed to be a pick man for the mafia from New York, and which means a killer. And but he could be Hollywood enough to hang with those guys. And so what I believe happened is Sharon Tate and these people were murdered because of drug running, because murders happen, guys. I know that a lot of fear porn on the news makes it seem like a lot of it's fake, like beyond fake, and they do it to keep you scared and they do it to start spells. Okay, the mafia and drug running gangs don't do it for spells. They don't do it for moon landing hoaxes. They do it because that's how they maintain order. And they make it really, really graphic and gratuitous. At the Tate Polanski residence, there was videotapes of Mama Cass, who, by the way, is this very obese. She was the singer of Mamas and the Papas. Mama Cass was one of the only non-vegans in the whole circle, right? That's why I believe when she was murdered, they said she choked on a ham sandwich. They probably just shoved a ham sandwich in her mouth. But these people started rolling with people that moved big amounts of drugs. And those people rule with a very, very violent and iron fist. These little sneaks like Polanski, where is he? These little sneaks like Polanski, where is he? They're just mostly motivated by intense perversion and fascination with the occult. They're not hardened. You know, this guy was hardened. So that's when things meet. Like a Polanski is just a coward, a pervert, a pedophile, a rapist, but not in the same level of like a Charles Manson. Like Charles Manson would, you know, rape girls to break them in order to sell them for sex. You know, he was like a career criminal. A Roman Polanski is just a perverted little grabber. And so when those two worlds meet, I don't think a lot of these Hollywood people had any idea what they were dealing with. The cartels will skin you. They'll cut out babies. They'll paint with your blood. That's how they rule. They rule with absolute violence. And so I believe that the Tate murders and all that had to do with drug running, cartels, and it also had to do with videotapes where very, very powerful people were having sex with men, women, animals. And that's one way that they were so controlled by the mafia and certain gangs. This is one of the most fascinating parts of the whole story. So the gun used in one of these murders was given to one of these quote unquote gang members named Tex, but it was given by Manson, who got it from Randy Starr, who got it from Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan's gun, which was a Wyatt Earp gun, was used in one of these murders. And I know right now some kind of tuned in people will be like, oh no, this reeks of the Matrix. This reeks of narratives and false narratives and pissed on breadcrumbs. No, not to me it doesn't. To me it reeks of Hollywood coke parties, Hollywood orgy parties that went way too close to mafia. Because I've seen that shit. Because when you have a bunch of drugs at a party, you have to have a guy, right? And I know a lot of celebrities that did a lot of coke. And so you got a guy, right? It's like kind of a sketchy guy that comes and hangs too long at the party. But he's all right, but, you know, he knows some other guys. The next level of guys is the guy, they're almost, you know, when I was there, it was almost always like they would be a Mexican gentleman. And then that guy is close to guys that cut people's babies out of their belly. And that's how they traumatize people. That's how they maintain. Anybody that knows how cartels work, that hit looks very cartelish. So now you're dealing with very powerful people. You're dealing with someone who becomes the president of the United States. You're dealing with Warren Beatty and all these people, right? So the way they kind of covered it up is they create this crazy narrative and drama about a cult leader and someone who, with sex, you know, convinces these like poor innocent girls. Those girls were all prostitutes, and they didn't even care that much about Charles Manson. You know, Charles Manson wasn't even their leader. He was just like their pimp. He would sell them, and then they would bail. You know, Manson, you know, the whole narrative is completely off. And so they created this. That's why, okay, there is Satanism. Like, satanic panic is nonsense because there is something to be panicked about with Satanism. But there's also a whole thing that happens when people will put occult ritual and Satanism and all this stuff and mind control and all this stuff, when in reality, it's very base. It's like very powerful people on camera having sex with men, like Warren Beatty, bisexual. A lot of these, and that was back when there was some shame in it. Yeah, Doris Day's son was part of all of this, by the way, as well. And so then they take the Krishna Aventi, or whatever his name was, the small hat from San Francisco. They take his cult story word for word and put it on Manson. And then Manson goes to jail, even though he didn't commit any of the crimes, and they say it's because he controlled these women. And now you have the organized crime involved. I wouldn't be surprised if some of these women didn't even have to do time. You know, some of the video is so sketchy, like they're wearing earrings and necklaces when that doesn't happen when you're in a lockdown, when you're in high security prison, stuff like that. Mexican cartels leave heads and guts at the crime scene to prove a point. Yeah, they have calling cards. And so when you see some of these grotesque actions, most Hollywood Satanism is really just gay and dumb. It's like they sit around in circles and they like chant to like Mother Goddess, and they like just fuck each other and like do coke and like maybe draw on each other's blood and stuff. Then there's another level. That's like most mainstream Hollywood actors are just they're LARPy little perverts and cowards. It's just dumpster pumping. Exactly. It's has nothing to do with like actual summoning of demons. There's a level of that. You know, like the people who run the studios, I bet, are involved in some real rituals, like some stuff that you don't even want to know exist. And but what happened with these people is they rub shoulders with guys that don't care how many Oscars they have. And that's what I believe it was. Manson had a beard in the 90s, and you weren't allowed to have facial hair in California prisons, 0 tolerance. Right, exactly. I think these people it became a LARP. You know, this is where I disagree with some of the people that don't think the murders happened. I know that I don't know, but I'm 99% sure the murders happened. At that point, you're dealing with backdoor deals with people that own the prisons. People that, you know, it's like they'll give you a deal like, this is what I suspect. You know, you have to go to prison, but you have to play this part. You know, like Jack Ruby and shit like that, where it's like, it's not really prison. You know, I think Isaac Cappy stumbled on the real evil shit. I don't know anything about that guy. I don't comment on that because it just there's some weirdness with that. Big wigs don't get down. Manson was a scapegoat like Oswald. Exactly. Manson wasn't innocent. This is why don't get involved with crime. It's one of the reasons, you know, Vox and I talk about taking the ticket. When you take the ticket, you know, you're selling women for sex, you're exploiting, you're drug running. Manson was definitely a murderer. You can be manipulated. You know, like the evil of this world can then just use you and your name any way they want. And so, yeah, Oswald was innocent of shooting Kennedy, but Oswald was not an innocent man. Oswald had tried to kill a governor. Fact. Oswald was rubbing shoulders with some commies that wanted to overthrow America. It's kind of like what happened with some of these bear purges. It's like, listen, it's like if you want to be a part of people that are actively trying to take down unauthorized, you're gone. I don't care what your intentions are. I don't care if you were misled. It's just you're out.